Well, we are on the wait for Crisis on Infinite Earth Part 2, but until then, we have a lot of questions. Let's take a couple minutes to dive into what we can expect from the upcoming sequel and some of the big questions that remain to be answered. So, let's dive in. Now, before we do that though, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and ring that bell for all the updates. We do daily Marvel and DC videos, and we want to be your place for all the superhero news, but we're going to bring it to you truthfully and transparently, so you are in the know. Well, so far for Crisis on Infinite Earth Part 2, we've really not gotten a lot of details. They did give us a short teaser trailer, and we know the whole Bat family is about to show up in the upcoming sequel, but it really gave us no insight into some of the major questions left over from Part 1. Part 1 introduced a lot of unanswered questions, and we can kind of look to the comics and some of the history of the shows to figure out where some of these are likely to line up with the original story. Now, the movie is absolutely taking place in the aftermath of previous DC animated universes, and seems very much tied to Apocalypse War and House of Mystery, giving both Constantine and the Flash massive roles. So let's start a little bit with Constantine and talk about some of the other things going on. Now, Part 1 of the trilogy saw Constantine appear several times, mostly as a homeless beggar, and he appeared to be in multiple versions of the multiverse, warning the Flash about the impending destruction of everything. Now, it's pretty clear to me this movie is connected to the previous DC animated universe, and I likely think this is indeed the version of the character that sent the Flash on his way after Apocalypse War to reboot the universe. Now, in the comics, Constantine took up the role of Pariah, the being who accidentally opened the door to the antimatter world in the comics, and I highly suspect him pushing the Flash into those events, well, I think that's what aligned him in the role. If this is true, it means he will more than likely walk the path of the Pariah from the comics, assisting the heroes and ultimately getting some kind of reward from Harbinger. Now, along with Constantine, the feature really is establishing itself around the Flash, and that is really derivative from the comics. The comics did see Barry Allen experiencing the end of different worlds, but the movie has tried to show what he can do with the Speed Force in the event of these massive upheavals. Flash actually vibrates so fast in the film he creates a pocket dimension, a space that is suspended in time, and in that space Barry and Iris live together until old age, while creating one of the towers with the help, amazingly, with Amazo. Now, the end of Part 1 sees the Spectre sending the old and worn out Barry Allen on a journey through time and telling him to go back before the beginning of time. Part 2 is expected to show the Anti-Monitor stopping Barry from completing his mission and stealing his Speed Force, giving him the ability to bend time and space. This gives the big villain the means to actually complete his mission, which is the destruction and remodeling of all of reality. Now, this means the odds of the heroes rescuing Barry are pretty slim, but the first film does hint at an interesting twist that does relate to the comics because Wally West was at the wedding, and if you know how the comics ended, well, you know Wally eventually becomes the new Flash. Now, an interesting thing about Barry's little pocket dimension was the fact that the Spectre was there. And if you're a fan of DC Comics, you know how big the Spectre is. The Spectre actually introduced himself to the Flash as God's Wrath. Now, typically, the Spectre considers himself a judge who doesn't really meddle in the world's affairs. But interestingly enough, he does show some empathy for the worn-out Barry Allen, and he even gives him the chance to make amends with this mission, sending him back to the beginning of time. Now, they haven't defined the Spectre's abilities in the film or referencing the comics, but he definitely has enough power to pretty much deal with any force in the universe. There's a high probability that the Spectre will play a huge role in the fight with the Anti-Monitor in Part 2, since ultimately losing to the Anti-Monitor means the destruction of all existence. Now, another element of the story that's unclear right now are all the dusted heroes. Now, during Part 1, we saw the alliance that brought together all the heroes and used the Flash's Speed Force to protect them from the antimatter wave. But once that happened, we saw several heroes like Dawnstar, Brainiac, and a couple of more simply disintegrate into dust. The ending of the film definitely cracks the door to Part 2, where we might find out what happened to these dusted characters. And the comic actually reveals that the Anti-Monitor abducted the dusted heroes so they would not be able to interfere with his plans in the future. This means these characters are super important to how the whole thing works out. So upon rewatch, you probably want to write down all the ones that disappeared because they are likely to play a much bigger role than expected. Now, as far as the film goes, we don't really have a lot of other details. We don't know when it's going to be released, and so far Warner Bros. Brothers is playing that pretty close to the chest. But they have already released a teaser trailer, and if I'm guessing, I suspect we will see this movie probably sometime in either April or May. That leaves room for part 3 to drop sometime this summer, and we also have Watchmen coming our way later this year, which also could be a multi-part film. So Warner Brothers Animation has a huge schedule, and I think they're being a bit methodical on when they release the information. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so you get all the updates on Crisis. This is one we're going to follow pretty close, and I know you, like me, can't wait to see the next chapter.